April 27th, 1944. The small coastal village of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, Normandy, France. A gentle rain fell on the worn cobblestone streets as villagers hurried about their daily tasks, unaware that in just 40 days, their quiet corner of the world would become the epicenter of the most significant military operation of the 20th century. For 13-year-old Elise Dubois, who had not spoken a word since German forces arrived 4 years earlier, the arrival of Allied forces would bring something far more significant than liberation. It would bring her voice back in the most unexpected way. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable tale of how a chance encounter between a young French girl and an African-American Marine would transcend language, trauma, and the chaos of conflict to reveal the extraordinary power of human connection in the darkest of times. Staff Sergeant Marcus Jackson of the 6th Marine Regiment stood 6 feet 3 inches tall with shoulders as broad as a doorframe. At 26 years old, he had already lived several lives, from the cotton fields of Georgia where he was born, to Howard University where he had studied literature on scholarship, to the segregated military training facilities where he had become one of the first African-American Marines in United States history. "You sure we got the right coordinates, Sarge?" Private First Class Thomas Wilson asked, shifting uncomfortably in his soaked uniform as they trudged along a narrow dirt path. The night was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. "According to headquarters, this village has information vital to the upcoming operation," Marcus replied, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "Our job is to make contact with the local resistance and extract that information. Nothing more, nothing less." The small unit of 6 Marines had been deployed on a classified reconnaissance mission weeks ahead of the main invasion forces. Their task was simple in theory, but enormously complex in execution: establish connections with French resistance cells and gather tactical intelligence about German defenses along the Normandy coastline. What made their mission particularly unusual was that they were all African-American Marines, part of a specialized unit created for exactly this type of operation. Military leadership had theorized that black servicemen might move more freely in certain contexts, as German intelligence often failed to recognize them as American military personnel, instead mistaking them for colonial troops from French African territories. "Seems mighty convenient they send us in first," muttered Corporal Raymond Davis, the team's radio operator, as he adjusted the heavy equipment strapped to his back. "They send us in first because we're the best they've got," Marcus replied with quiet confidence, though he harbored no illusions about why they had been selected for such a dangerous assignment. The Marines moved silently through the countryside, using the techniques they had perfected during months of specialized training. They had parachuted into occupied France 3 nights earlier and had been making their way toward the coastal villages ever since, avoiding German patrols and navigating solely by map and compass. 5 kilometers east of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, in a modest farmhouse set back from the main road, Elise Dubois sat by candlelight, carefully drawing in a small notebook. Her mother, Jeanne Dubois, watched with a mixture of love and concern as her daughter's pencil moved across the paper, creating intricate sketches of birds in flight. "Your father would be so proud of your drawings," Jeanne said softly, knowing she would receive no verbal response. Elise had not spoken since the day German forces had entered their village and taken her father away. October 3rd, 1940. The local doctor had examined her and found nothing physically wrong with her vocal cords. "It is the trauma," he had explained. "Some wounds cannot be seen, but they are the deepest of all." In the years that followed, Elise had developed an extraordinary ability to communicate through her drawings. Complex emotions, observations, and even questions were expressed through her artwork with remarkable clarity. Her mother had learned to interpret the subtle differences in her sketches. Birds meant freedom or news, closed doors represented secrets or danger, and open windows signaled opportunity or hope. That evening, Elise drew something new, figures approaching from the distance. Neither German uniforms nor French clothing, but something different entirely. Jean studied the drawing with growing interest. "You've seen someone, haven't you?" she whispered, glancing nervously toward the window. "Americans," Are they finally coming? Elise nodded, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. She flipped to a new page and drew a quick map of the forest path behind their farm, then marked an X near the old stone well. You saw them there. Today. When Elise nodded again, Jeanne quickly gathered the drawings and tucked them inside a hollow leg of the kitchen table, one of many hiding places they had created throughout their home. If they are who we think they are, they'll make contact with Monsieur Bernard first. He will know what to do. Monsieur Bernard was the local baker and the secret leader of the area's resistance cell. What few people knew was that Jeanne herself served as his primary messenger, carrying coded information hidden in ordinary objects as she went about her daily errands in the village. That same night, Marcus and his team reached the outskirts of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. Following protocol, they established a hidden base camp in the dense forest and prepared to make contact with their assigned resistance liaison, a baker identified only as the Owl in their briefing materials. Wilson, you and Davis will maintain position here, Marcus instructed. Peterson and Reynolds establish perimeter security. Cooper, you're with me. We'll make initial contact at 0400 hours. Private James Cooper nodded, checking his timepiece. At 22, he was the youngest member of the unit and the only one who spoke passable French, having grown up in Louisiana, where his grandmother had insisted he learn the language. Just like we practiced, Coop, Marcus said with a reassuring nod. Remember, we're looking for a man who will respond to the phrase, "The oysters are fresh in June." With all due respect, Sarge, Cooper replied with a slight grin. That has got to be the most ridiculous password I've ever heard. Marcus allowed himself a rare smile. Intelligence officers with desk jobs come up with these things. Just be grateful they didn't make it any more complicated. As dawn approached, Marcus and Cooper made their way toward the village, dressed in civilian clothes provided by their intelligence officers. Simple workman's attire that would not attract immediate attention. They carried no visible weapons, though each had a knife concealed in their boot and a small-caliber pistol hidden beneath their jackets. The village was just beginning to stir when they arrived. A few early risers moved about the cobblestone streets, preparing for the day ahead. The aroma of fresh bread guided them to a small bakery at the corner of the main square, its windows illuminated by warm light from within. Bernard Fournier had been baking since 3 that morning, as he did every day. At 58 years old, with a round face partially hidden behind a thick grey moustache, he appeared to be nothing more than a simple baker. Few would suspect that this unassuming man had helped dozens of downed Allied airmen escape to neutral territory, or that he coordinated a network of informants who tracked German troop movements along the coast. When Marcus and Cooper entered his shop, Bernard barely glanced up from his work, kneading dough with powerful hands. 2 German soldiers were already there, selecting pastries for their morning meal. The Americans browsed the display case silently, waiting for the Germans to leave. After completing their purchase, the German soldiers departed, nodding curtly to Bernard as they exited. Once the door closed behind them, Bernard turned the sign to "Closed" and pulled down the window shade. "We don't see many strangers these days," he said in French, his eyes carefully assessing the 2 men before him. Cooper stepped forward. "The oysters are fresh in June," he said quietly, his accent immediately identifying him as non-native. Bernard's expression remained neutral. "Only a fool would eat oysters before September," he replied, completing the authentication sequence. Then, switching to heavily accented English, he added, "Come, quickly, to the back." He led them through the kitchen to a small living area behind the bakery. Once the door was secured, Bernard's demeanor changed completely. "Americans! Finally!" he exclaimed, his voice low but filled with emotion. "We have been waiting for so long, but they did not tell a—" He hesitated, his eyes moving between Marcus and Cooper. "They did not tell you that we would be black." Marcus finished for him, having encountered this reaction many times before. Bernard shook his head. No. It is not that. They did not tell us you would come so far ahead of the main force. This is very dangerous. There are many German patrols, and they have been increasingly suspicious. Just last week, they arrested 3 people from the neighboring village on suspicion of resistance activities. For the next hour, they exchanged information. Marcus shared the coded details of the upcoming operation, Nothing specific enough to compromise security if intercepted, but enough for the resistance to prepare. In return, Bernard provided invaluable intelligence about German defenses, patrol schedules, and potential landing sites along the coast. "There is something else," Bernard said as their meeting concluded. "Something not in any report. The Germans have been constructing new defensive positions here and here." He pointed to locations on their map. "But they are having difficulty completing them because of the soil conditions. This information comes from French workers forced to assist with construction." Marcus studied the map carefully. This could be crucial. Concrete fortifications that aren't fully set would be significantly more vulnerable. As they prepared to leave, Bernard handed them a loaf of bread. Inside is a more detailed map drawn by one of our members. There is also a list of German supply depots and ammunition storage facilities within 20 kilometers of the coast. This information has cost lives to obtain. Use it wisely. Cooper accepted the bread with reverence, understanding the sacrifices it represented. "One more thing," Bernard added. "For your return journey, avoid the main road. German patrols have increased there. Take the forest path behind the Dubois farm instead. Jeanne Dubois is one of us. If you need shelter, draw an X on her well. She will find you." With the information secured, Marcus and Cooper made their way back toward their hidden camp, taking a circuitous route to avoid detection. The morning had advanced, and more villagers were now moving about, casting curious glances at the strangers in their midst. They were halfway back when disaster struck. A German patrol appeared suddenly at the end of the street, conducting random checks of pedestrians. There was no way to avoid them without arousing suspicion. "Keep walking, normal pace," Marcus murmured. "Remember your cover story." As they approached, one of the German soldiers stepped directly into their path, hand raised to halt them. "Papers," he demanded in accented French. Cooper produced the forged identification documents they had been provided, explaining in his practiced French that they were laborers from Caen, seeking agricultural work in the coastal villages where food was more plentiful. The German soldier scrutinized their papers with suspicious eyes. Just as he seemed about to wave them through, his commanding officer approached and began asking more detailed questions about their journey and purpose. Marcus maintained his composure, allowing Cooper to translate and respond, but he could sense the situation deteriorating. The officer was not satisfied with their answers and ordered them to come to headquarters for further questioning. It was at that precise moment that fate intervened in the form of a small commotion further down the street. A young girl had apparently collided with another German soldier, causing him to spill his coffee. The distraction was minor, but it drew the attention of the entire patrol for a crucial few seconds, just long enough for Marcus to notice a narrow alleyway to their right. With a subtle nod to Cooper, they bolted, darting into the alleyway as shouts erupted behind them. The sound of boots on cobblestones told them the patrol was in pursuit. "Split up," Marcus ordered as they reached a fork in the path. "Rendezvous at camp. If I'm not there by nightfall, proceed with the mission." Cooper hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding and veering left. Marcus took the right path, deliberately making enough noise to draw the majority of pursuers in his direction, away from his younger comrade. The chase led Marcus through a maze of narrow streets and alleys, each twist and turn taking him further from his intended route, but also confusing his pursuers. He could hear them behind him, their voices growing more distant as he increased his lead. After nearly 15 minutes of evasive maneuvering, Marcus found himself at the edge of the village, facing open fields with no cover in sight, except for a small farmhouse about 500 meters away, partially concealed by a grove of apple trees. With no better option available, he sprinted toward it, hoping to find temporary shelter, until he could safely make his way back to the team. As he approached the farmhouse, he noticed a stone well in the yard. Remembering Bernard's instructions, he quickly found a piece of chalk in his pocket and drew a rough X on the well's edge before continuing to a dilapidated barn behind the main house. Inside the barn, Marcus found a ladder leading to a hayloft. He climbed up and concealed himself beneath the hay, controlling his breathing as he listened for signs of pursuit. Minutes passed, then an hour. No German voices approached, but he dared not move until he was certain it was safe. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows, when Marcus heard the barn door creak open. He tensed, hand moving to the concealed pistol in his jacket. Light footsteps crossed the dirt floor below, too light for a soldier in boots. A soft voice called out in French, "Hello, are you here? It's safe now." Marcus remained still, uncertain whether to reveal himself. "American?" the voice called again, this time in heavily accented English. "I see mark on well. I friend. Resistance." Slowly, Marcus shifted position to peer down through the hay. Standing below was a woman in her late 30s, her dark hair tied back with a simple scarf, wearing the practical clothes of a farm worker. "The Germans have gone back to the village," she said, her English broken but understandable. "They search houses on Main Road, not here yet, but will come soon. Must hide you better." Marcus descended the ladder cautiously, still alert for any sign of deception. The woman studied him with undisguised curiosity but no fear. "I am Jeanne Dubois," she said, extending her hand in greeting. "Bernard told me Americans might come. Did not say when, did not say—" She gestured vaguely at his appearance. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Jackson," he replied, accepting her handshake. "United States Marines." Jeanne nodded. "Come. House safer than barn. Germans already searched barn 2 days ago, not likely return soon." She led him through the back door of the farmhouse into a modest kitchen. The room was simple, but immaculately clean, with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams and a small fire burning in the hearth. "Sit," she instructed, indicating a chair at the wooden table. "Eat something, then we plan." As she busied herself preparing a simple meal of bread and soup, Marcus noticed movement in the doorway. A young girl stood there, watching him with intense, curious eyes. She appeared to be about 13, with the same dark hair as her mother, though her eyes held a wariness that seemed beyond her years. "My daughter, Elise," Jeanne explained, following his gaze. "She not speak. Not since Germans come 4 years ago." Elise entered the room slowly, never taking her eyes off Marcus. She carried a small notebook, which she placed on the table before sitting down across from him. With deliberate movements, she opened the notebook and began to sketch. "She speak through drawings," Jeanne explained, "since her father taken." Marcus watched in fascination as the girl's pencil moved swiftly across the paper. Within minutes, she had produced a remarkably accurate portrait of him, capturing not just his features, but somehow the weariness and determination in his eyes. "That's amazing," he said, genuinely impressed. "You have a real gift, Elise." The girl did not respond verbally, but her eyes flickered up to meet his, and the corner of her mouth curved in the slightest hint of a smile. Jeanne placed a bowl of soup before him. "Eat. Then we talk about how to get you back to your men." As Marcus ate the simple but nourishing meal, Jeanne explained that German patrols had established checkpoints on all main roads leading out of the village. They were conducting systematic searches of the outlying farms, moving in a clockwise pattern around the village perimeter. "They reach here tomorrow, maybe next day," she said grimly. "Not safe to move now. Too many soldiers. Must wait until night, then use old smuggler path through forest. I show you after dark." Marcus considered his options. His team would be expecting his return, but attempting to reach them now would almost certainly lead to capture. His mission was too important to risk. "My men will continue without me if necessary," he said finally. "The information we gathered must reach our command." Jeanne nodded in understanding. "One night here, then I guide you." Throughout this conversation, Elise had continued drawing, filling page after page with rapid sketches. She pushed one across the table toward Marcus, a detailed map of the surrounding area, marking what appeared to be German patrol routes and checkpoints. "How does she know all this?" Marcus asked, stunned by the accuracy and detail of the drawing. "She watches," Jeanne said simply. "Every day she climbs old oak tree behind house, sees everything, remembers everything." Elise turned to a new page and drew a quick sketch of Marcus in the forest, meeting with other figures wearing the same clothing. She tapped the paper questioningly. "Yes," Marcus confirmed, understanding her inquiry. "I need to get back to my team. They're waiting for me in the forest." The girl nodded, then drew another sketch, this one showing a path through the trees, with the moon overhead and a small figure that appeared to be herself, leading the way. Marcus looked to Jeanne for interpretation. "She wants to guide you," Jeanne explained, her expression troubled. "She knows forest better than anyone, better than me, but too dangerous." Before the discussion could continue, they heard the distant sound of vehicles approaching. Jeanne moved quickly to the window, peering out cautiously through a gap in the curtains. "German patrol," she whispered urgently. "Not scheduled for today. Someone must have reported seeing strangers." Marcus rose immediately, looking for an escape route, but Jeanne shook her head. "No time, they already too close." She pointed to a trapdoor partially hidden beneath a rug. "Cellar, quickly." She lifted the heavy wooden door, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. Marcus climbed down, finding himself in a small damp cellar lined with shelves of preserved foods and wine bottles. "Stay silent," Jeanne instructed as she prepared to close the trapdoor. "No matter what you hear." Elise appeared at her mother's side, clutching her notebook. Before Jeanne could stop her, the girl climbed down into the cellar with Marcus. "Elise, no!" Jeanne hissed. "Come back up." But the sound of vehicles stopping outside the farmhouse made it clear there was no time. With a look of anguish, Jeanne closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug, leaving Marcus and Elise together in the darkness below. Heavy boots stomped across the floorboards above them. German voices called out commands, followed by Jeanne's cautious responses. Marcus could make out only fragments of the conversation, but the tone made the situation clear. They were conducting a search. Beside him in the darkness, Elise was completely still, her breathing so quiet it was almost imperceptible. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, feeling her slight frame trembling despite her outward composure. The footsteps moved methodically through the house, accompanied by the sounds of furniture being moved and cupboards being opened. Twice, boots walked directly over the trapdoor, causing dust to filter down into the cellar. Each time, Marcus tensed, ready to defend the child beside him if they were discovered. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps receded. Car doors slammed, engines started, and the sound of vehicles driving away gradually faded into the distance. Still, they waited in silence, following Jeanne's instruction to remain hidden regardless of what they heard. Nearly 30 minutes passed before the trapdoor finally opened, revealing Jeanne's worried face. "They are gone," she said, her voice strained. "For now." Marcus helped Elise up the ladder, then climbed out himself. The kitchen showed signs of the search. Drawers left open, items moved from their proper places, but nothing appeared to be broken or seriously disturbed. "They say they will return tomorrow with more men," Jeanne explained, her hands busy restoring order to her kitchen. "They are searching all farms now. Someone reported seeing American parachutes 3 nights ago." Marcus's expression darkened. "Then I need to leave tonight. My presence puts you both in danger." Jeanne nodded grimly. "Yes." "After midnight, roads will have fewer patrols then." She glanced at her daughter, who was already drawing again, her pencil moving with urgent purpose across the page. "And yes, Elise will guide you. I cannot leave the house unattended. It would raise suspicion. She knows the forest paths better than anyone." Marcus started to object, concerned about placing a child in such danger, but the determined look in Elise's eyes stopped him. She showed him her drawing, a detailed map of their planned route with specific landmarks noted and potential danger areas marked. "She has been helping resistance for 2 years already," Jeanne said quietly. "Small hands can go places, adults cannot. Small eyes notice things others miss. She may not speak, but she has done more to fight back than many men with guns." That evening, they prepared carefully for the journey ahead. Jeanne packed a small satchel with bread, cheese, and a canteen of water. She provided Marcus with a farmer's cap and jacket to replace his more conspicuous clothing. Elise changed into dark colors that would blend with the night and gathered her notebook and pencils. As midnight approached, Jeanne embraced her daughter fiercely. "Be careful, my heart," she whispered, though she knew she would receive no verbal response. To Marcus, she said simply, "Bring her back to me." "I will protect her with my life," he promised, the solemnity in his voice leaving no doubt of his sincerity. They slipped out through the back door, keeping low as they crossed the moonlit yard to the edge of the forest. Once beneath the cover of trees, Elise took the lead, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every root and branch of the path ahead. For nearly an hour, they traveled in complete silence, Elise navigating by moonlight and memory. Twice she signaled Marcus to stop and remain still, as German patrols passed nearby on the main road. Each time her timing was flawless, her awareness of their surroundings almost supernatural. They had covered approximately 3 kilometers when Elise suddenly froze, her hand shooting up in warning. Marcus immediately crouched lower, straining his senses to detect what had alarmed her. At first he heard nothing, but then faint voices speaking German, coming from somewhere to their right. Elise tugged at his sleeve, indicating they should change direction. They began moving more quickly through the underbrush, angling away from the voices, but the sounds seemed to be growing louder rather than fading. Without warning, a bright beam of light swept through the trees ahead of them, a patrol with flashlights moving in their direction. There was no time to run and nowhere to hide on the narrow path. Marcus made a split-second decision. Lifting Elise as though she weighed nothing, he carried her to the base of a massive oak tree and whispered urgently, "Climb, as high as you can. Don't come down until it's safe." The girl hesitated only briefly before nodding and beginning to scale the tree with practiced ease. Marcus watched until she was safely concealed among the branches, then turned to face the approaching patrol. He would lead them away from Elise, even if it meant his own capture. Moving deliberately away from the tree, he created enough noise to attract attention, then sprinted through the forest in the opposite direction from their intended path. The shouts behind him confirmed his plan had worked. The patrol was now in pursuit, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly as they gave chase. Marcus ran with controlled precision, using every technique he had learned during his training. He was faster than his pursuers and knew how to move through dense terrain more efficiently, but they had numbers and familiarity with the area on their side. After several minutes of pursuit, Marcus found himself facing an unexpected obstacle, a wide stream cutting across his path. With no time to search for a crossing, he plunged into the cold water, wading through the chest-deep current as quietly as possible. On the far bank, he ducked behind a fallen tree, using it as cover while he caught his breath and assessed his situation. The voices of his pursuers grew more distant as they continued along the bank, apparently losing his trail at the water's edge. Once the forest had returned to silence, Marcus faced a difficult decision. He could continue toward his team's location, the safest choice for his mission, or return to find Elise, potentially leading the Germans back to her if they were still searching the area. There really was no decision to make. He had promised Jeanne he would protect her daughter, and Marines did not break their promises. With extreme caution, Marcus began making his way back toward the oak tree where he had left Elise, moving silently and stopping frequently to listen for signs of the German patrol. It took him nearly 40 minutes to return to the location, approaching from a different direction to avoid potential ambush. The massive oak stood as he remembered, but there was no sign of Elise among its branches. "Elise," he whispered, as loudly as he dared. "It's Marcus. It's safe now." No response came from the tree or the surrounding darkness. Had she been discovered? Had she tried to make her way home alone, or was she simply too frightened to reveal herself? Marcus was considering his next move when a small pebble struck the ground near his feet. He looked up to see Elise perched on a branch, her face a pale oval in the moonlight. She gestured for him to wait, then climbed down with remarkable agility, landing softly beside him. Immediately she opened her notebook and began sketching by the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. The drawing showed German soldiers setting up positions along the path ahead, the very route they had been planning to take. "They're blocking our way," Marcus whispered. Elise nodded, then turned to a fresh page and drew an alternative route, indicating a longer path that would arc far to the east before turning back toward the location of his team's camp. Marcus studied the map, estimating the additional time and distance. "This will take us hours longer," he murmured, more to himself than to Elise. The delay would cause his team significant concern, possibly even leading them to assume he had been captured and proceed without him, but there was no safer alternative. "Lead the way," he said with a nod. As they set off on the new route, Marcus realized that their relationship had shifted subtly. They were now partners in this dangerous journey, relying on each other's strengths, his training and physical capabilities, her knowledge of the terrain, and remarkable observational skills. The night deepened around them as they traveled east, adding an additional 5 kilometers to their journey to avoid German patrols. Despite her youth, Elise showed no signs of tiring, moving through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone born to its shadows. During a brief rest, Elise offered Marcus water from the canteen Jean had packed. As he drank gratefully, he noticed her studying him with intense curiosity. "Thank you," he said softly, returning the canteen. "You're very brave, you know that." She ducked her head slightly at the compliment, then opened her notebook again. This time she didn't draw, but instead wrote a single word in careful letters. "Why?" Marcus wasn't sure what she was asking, until she pointed at his uniform, partially visible beneath the borrowed farmer's jacket, then gestured to her own skin and back to his. "Why am I fighting?" he clarified, understanding her question. When she nodded, he considered how to explain complex realities to a child who had already seen too much of the world's darkness. "Because freedom isn't just for some people," he said finally. "It's for everyone. My country isn't perfect. There are people there who look at me and see only my color. But there are also people who see me, Marcus Jackson, and all that I can be. I'm fighting for them and for people like your mother and for you, so you can speak again one day if you want to." Elise's expression remained solemn as she absorbed his words. Then she wrote another word. "Home? My home?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Augusta, Georgia. It's hot in summer, with trees dripping Spanish moss and fireflies lighting up the evenings. My mother teaches school there. My father builds houses. I have 2 sisters and a brother, all younger than me." Elise sketched rapidly, creating a scene with a small house surrounded by trees, with 5 figures standing before it. She pointed to one of the taller figures questioningly. "That's me," Marcus confirmed, touched by her effort to visualize his family. "Though our house is a bit smaller than that, and a lot more worn down." They continued these quiet exchanges as they rested, creating a bubble of humanity in the midst of conflict. Marcus found himself sharing stories of his university days, his dreams of becoming a teacher like his mother, the books he loved. Elise responded with drawings, scenes from her own life before the war, her father teaching her to fish in the local stream, her mother singing while she baked bread. In those moments, they were not soldier and child, American and French, black and white. They were simply 2 people finding connection across the artificial boundaries that so often divided humanity. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when they finally approached the vicinity of Marcus's team's camp. He signaled for Elise to wait while he advanced alone, using the recognition codes they had established to prevent friendly fire incidents. "Chesapeake," he called softly as he approached the perimeter. "Oriole," came the immediate response from the shadows, followed by the welcome sight of Private Cooper emerging from his concealed position, relief evident on his face. "Sergeant Jackson, we thought you'd been captured." "Nearly was," Marcus replied. "I had help escaping." He turned to gesture Elise forward, but the girl remained hidden at the forest's edge, suddenly shy in the presence of more uniformed Americans. "It's all right," he called to her gently. "These are my friends. You're safe." Slowly, Elise emerged from the shadows, her notebook clutched protectively against her chest. Cooper's eyes widened in surprise. "A child? She helped you evade German patrols?" "She did more than that," Marcus said, placing a protective hand on Elise's shoulder as they entered the camp together. "She knows every German position between here and her village, and she's got it all documented in that notebook." Within minutes, the entire team was gathered around as Elise opened her notebook, revealing page after page of detailed observations, patrol schedules, fortification locations, troop movements, even specific information about weapons and vehicle types. "This is intelligence gold," Corporal Davis whispered in awe. "How did she get all this?" "She watches," Marcus said simply, "and she remembers everything." As the Marines studied Elise's drawings, Marcus explained the situation in the village and the increasing German presence. "We need to move our position," he concluded. "They're conducting systematic searches of the entire area. It's only a matter of time before they expand into this sector. Captain Thompson, who had been silent until now, nodded in agreement. We have what we came for. It's time to transmit this intelligence and prepare for extraction. He turned to Elise with unexpected gentleness. Thank you, young lady. You've done a great service for the Allied forces today. Elise ducked her head slightly, uncomfortable with the attention, but clearly pleased by the recognition. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook and sketched a quick map showing the location of their camp relative to her farm, then drew a question mark. She's asking how she gets home, Marcus interpreted. We can't spare the manpower for an escort mission, Captain Thompson said regretfully. Our primary objective has to be getting this intelligence back to headquarters. I'll take her, Marcus said immediately. Get her back safely to her mother, then rendezvous with you at the extraction point. Thompson's expression was skeptical. That's an unnecessary risk, Sergeant. The girl found her way here. She can find her way back. With respect, sir, I gave her mother my word that I would protect her. Marines keep their promises. Thompson studied Marcus's face for a long moment, then sighed. Very well. But be at the extraction point by 2100 hours tomorrow. The submarine won't wait. As the team broke camp and prepared to move to their new position, Marcus took Elise aside. I'm taking you home, he told her. But we'll need to wait until nightfall. It's too dangerous to move during daylight. For the first time since they'd met, Elise looked truly concerned. She opened her notebook and wrote urgently, Mother worried. Marcus nodded in understanding. I know, but your safety is what matters most to her. We'll get you home, I promise. Just a little more patience. They spent the day in a carefully concealed position, sharing the team's rations and resting in preparation for the night journey. Marcus used the time to teach Elise a few basic English words, writing them in her notebook and pronouncing them slowly for her to see the shapes his mouth made. Tree, he would say, pointing to the massive oaks around them. Water, as he offered her his canteen. Friend, he added, pointing to himself and then to her. Though she would not speak the words aloud, Elise would form the shapes with her mouth, practicing silently. Her quick intelligence was evident in how rapidly she connected the English words to their French equivalents. As dusk approached, they prepared for the return journey. Captain Thompson provided them with additional rations and a small first aid kit. Just in case, he said gruffly, his earlier reluctance softened by the hours spent observing the remarkable bond that had formed between the Marine sergeant and the mute French girl. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied, sensing the shift in his commanding officer's attitude. We'll move fast and stay low. See that you do. And, Sergeant, Thompson added as Marcus turned to leave. That's one special kid. Make sure she gets home safe. Count on it, sir. With the team's blessing, Marcus and Elise set out as darkness fell, taking a different route than before to avoid the areas where German patrols had been active. The night was cloudy, providing better cover but making navigation more challenging. Once again, Elise led the way, her intimate knowledge of the landscape proving invaluable. They had covered approximately half the distance to her farm when the sound of distant artillery fire reached them, an unusual occurrence in this relatively quiet sector. Marcus paused, listening intently to the pattern and direction. Coastal batteries, he murmured. They must be conducting exercises. But the intensity of the bombardment seemed excessive for mere drills. Something significant was happening along the coast, though it was impossible to determine what from their position. The artillery fire had an unexpected consequence. German patrols that would normally be spread throughout the countryside were being redirected toward the coast, leaving their path clearer than anticipated. We might get lucky, Marcus told Elise as they continued their journey. With all that activity on the coast, we might make it back to your farm without encountering any patrols at all. His optimism proved premature. They had just entered a clearing when the unmistakable sound of a rifle bolt being drawn back froze them in their tracks. Halt! Hands up! Came the command in German-accented French. Marcus raised his hands slowly, stepping slightly in front of Elise in a protective gesture. A German soldier emerged from the trees, his rifle aimed squarely at Marcus's chest. He was young, perhaps no more than 20, and appeared to be alone, likely a sentry posted to watch this crossing while the main patrol was elsewhere. Papers, the soldier demanded, gesturing with his rifle. Marcus knew his forged documents wouldn't withstand close scrutiny, especially now that the Germans were actively searching for American infiltrators. He needed to act quickly, but with extreme caution. One wrong move could endanger Elise. "We're just trying to get home," Marcus said in English, hoping to buy time as he assessed his options. "The girl is my guide." The German's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "American," he stated flatly, his finger moving closer to the trigger. "Hands on your head. Turn around." As Marcus complied, he caught sight of Elise reaching slowly into her pocket. Before he could warn her against any rash action, she had pulled out her notebook and pencil. To his astonishment, rather than attempting to flee or hide, she stepped forward and began sketching rapidly. The German soldier watched in confusion as she tore out the completed page and held it up for him to see. It was a portrait of a young woman with a warm smile, bearing a striking resemblance to the soldier himself, perhaps a sister or sweetheart back in Germany. Next to this, Elise had drawn the soldier in civilian clothes, standing beside the woman in what appeared to be a peaceful garden. The German's expression shifted from suspicion to surprise, then to a complex mixture of homesickness and sorrow. For a brief moment he was no longer a soldier, but simply a young man far from home, confronted with a poignant reminder of what he had left behind and hoped to return to. In that moment of human connection, his rifle lowered slightly, just enough for Marcus to act. With the lightning reflexes that had made him an exemplary Marine, he spun around and closed the distance between them, disarming the soldier with a swift, precise movement that rendered him unconscious without causing serious injury. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, genuinely regretful for the necessity of his actions. He checked the young man's pulse to ensure he was only unconscious, then turned to Elise. "We need to move quickly. When he doesn't report in, they'll send others to look for him." Elise nodded, retrieving her drawing and tucking it back into her notebook, before following Marcus into the forest at a near run. They maintained this pace for nearly a kilometer, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the unconscious sentry. When they finally paused to catch their breath, Marcus turned to Elise with new respect in his eyes. "That was quick thinking back there. How did you know to draw his family?" Elise opened her notebook and wrote, "He had photo, looked at it earlier." Her powers of observation continued to amaze him. Even in a moment of extreme danger, she had noticed the small detail of the sentry checking a personal photograph, and she had used that observation to create a critical moment of distraction. "You just might be the bravest person I've ever met," Marcus told her, his voice soft but filled with genuine admiration. Elise's response was to take his hand and tug him forward, reminding him that their journey was far from complete. They needed to reach her farm before dawn, and before the unconscious sentry was discovered. The remainder of their journey passed without further incident, though they maintained heightened vigilance. The distant artillery fire continued sporadically, suggesting that whatever operation was underway along the coast was substantial and ongoing. As they approached the Dubois farm in the pre-dawn light, they could see Jeanne standing in the doorway, her anxious vigil evidence that she had not slept during her daughter's absence. When she caught sight of them emerging from the forest, she ran to meet them, gathering Elise in a fierce embrace. "Thank God," she whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead repeatedly. "Thank God you are safe." Over Elise's head, her eyes met Marcus's, filled with gratitude too profound for words. He nodded in acknowledgement, understanding that some bonds required no verbal expression. Inside the farmhouse, Jeanne insisted on providing a proper meal despite the early hour. As they ate the simple but nourishing food, Marcus explained the events of the past 24 hours, including their encounter with the German sentry. "He will be missed by now," Jean said worriedly. "They will intensify their searches." "All the more reason for me to leave quickly," Marcus replied. "My team has an extraction planned for tonight. I need to reach the rendezvous point by 2100 hours. Jean nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "The German presence has increased significantly overnight. There is something happening along the coast, something important. It may be difficult for you to travel safely." "I've noticed the artillery activity," Marcus agreed. "Any idea what they're responding to?" "Rumors only," Jean said, lowering her voice though there was no one else to hear. Some say Allied aircraft have been dropping supplies to resistance groups all along the coast. Others believe it is the beginning of the invasion we have been waiting for. Marcus knew it was too early for the main invasion, but reconnaissance and preparatory operations were intensifying as the planned date approached. What Jeanne was describing could be part of those efforts, or it could be an unrelated German exercise. Either way, it complicated his journey back to his team. "Is there any safer route I could take?" he asked. "Perhaps another resistance contact who could guide me." Before Jean could respond, Elise tugged at Marcus's sleeve. When he turned to her, she opened her notebook to a fresh page and began drawing what appeared to be an underground tunnel or passage. "The old smuggler tunnels," Jeanne explained, studying her daughter's drawing. "From centuries ago, when goods were moved along the coast to avoid taxation. Most have collapsed or been forgotten, but some remain passable." Elise continued drawing, creating a map that showed a tunnel entrance concealed in a small grove near the coastal cliffs, with its exit located just 2 kilometers from Marcus's extraction point. "You know this tunnel?" Marcus asked her directly. Elise nodded confidently, then wrote beside her drawing, "Father showed me." "It's dangerous," Jeanne warned. "The tunnels are old, some sections unstable. But if they remain undetected by the Germans, it would indeed provide a safer route than traveling overland through areas of increased patrol activity." Marcus studied the map carefully, weighing the risks. An unstable tunnel presented one kind of danger, while German patrols presented another. In the end, the decision came down to which risk better served his mission. "I'll take the tunnel route," he decided, "but I'll need a guide who knows it well." Both he and Jeanne turned to look at Elise, who was already nodding her agreement before either of them could ask. She added another note to her drawing. "I will show you." "No," Jeanne said immediately, her protective instincts flaring. "You've done enough, Elise, it's too dangerous." But Elise was insistent, adding more writing to her page. "No one else knows the way. Must be me." The debate continued for several minutes, with Jeanne reluctant to risk her daughter's safety again, and Elise equally determined to complete what she saw as her duty to the resistance. And perhaps, Marcus suspected, what she saw as her duty to him personally after the connection they had formed. In the end, it was Marcus who found the compromise. "What if we all go together?" he suggested. "Jeanne, you could come as far as the tunnel entrance to ensure Elise's safety on the initial journey. Once we reach the tunnel, I can continue alone using Elise's map." Elise shook her head vigorously at this suggestion, writing, "Tunnel passages change. Map not enough." "She's right," Jeanne admitted reluctantly. "The tunnels shift with the tides and storms. What was passable last month might be flooded or collapse now. Without someone who knows the current conditions, you could become trapped." The discussion might have continued indefinitely had it not been interrupted by the distant sound of vehicles approaching the farm. All three froze, listening intently as the engines grew louder. "German patrol," Jeanne whispered, moving quickly to the window. "2 vehicles coming up the main road." "Are they coming here specifically or just passing by?" Marcus asked, already calculating escape routes. "Hard to tell," Jeanne replied, watching the approaching vehicles with mounting concern. "But after what happened with the sentry, they may be searching all farms in the area." Marcus made a rapid decision. "Is there somewhere I can hide until they pass?" "The cellar again," Jeanne suggested. "But if they conduct a thorough search—" "We need a distraction," Marcus said, "something to prevent them from searching too carefully." Elise was already writing in her notebook, her pencil flying across the page. When she showed her plan to the adults, both looked at her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "That could work," Marcus said slowly, "but it puts you at risk." "All of us are at risk every moment the Germans occupy our country," Jeanne replied, her voice suddenly hard with resolve. "My daughter is merely suggesting we use their own assumptions against them." With the patrol now less than 500 meters from the farm, they quickly put Elise's plan into action. Marcus descended to the cellar once again, this time concealing himself beneath empty wine barrels in the farthest corner. Above, Jeanne and Elise transformed the kitchen in a matter of minutes. Jeanne removed her headscarf, loosened her hair, and smeared flour on her face to create the appearance of paleness and exhaustion. Elise lay on a pallet near the hearth, covered with blankets despite the mild spring weather, a damp cloth placed on her forehead. When the German patrol arrived at the farm, they found what appeared to be a concerned mother tending to her seriously ill child. "What do you want now?" Jeanne demanded in French as they entered, her voice cracking with apparently genuine distress. "My daughter has a high fever. The doctor from the village was here yesterday and said it might be contagious." The German officer leading the patrol hesitated visibly at this information. Contagious illness was something even armed soldiers treated with healthy respect, particularly in rural areas where medical care was limited. "We are conducting searches of all properties following security incidents in the area," he stated, though he remained near the doorway rather than entering fully into the kitchen. "Have you seen any strangers or suspicious activities?" "The only person who has been here in days is the doctor," Jeanne replied, returning to Elise's side and adjusting the damp cloth on her forehead with theatrical concern. "And he recommended quarantine. If you insist on searching, please be quick about it. My daughter needs rest." The officer conferred briefly with his men in German, clearly reluctant to risk exposure to whatever illness the child might have. After a brief internal struggle between duty and self-preservation, he made his decision. "We will check the outbuildings and perimeter," he informed Jeanne stiffly. "Keep the child isolated as the doctor advised. Report immediately if you observe any suspicious persons or activities." With that, the patrol withdrew, conducting only a cursory examination of the barn and other outbuildings before departing much more quickly than they had arrived. When the sound of their vehicles had faded into the distance, Jeanne helped Marcus out of the cellar, her face breaking into a relieved smile. It worked. Elise's plan worked perfectly. Elise had already discarded her blankets and was sitting up, a look of quiet satisfaction on her face as she watched the German's dust trail disappearing down the road. "Quick thinking again," Marcus told her with genuine admiration. "You have quite a talent for strategy." The girl ducked her head slightly at the compliment, but her eyes shone with pride. With the immediate danger past, they returned to planning Marcus's route to the extraction point. The encounter with the patrol had only reinforced the risks of traveling overland, making the tunnel option, despite its own dangers, seem increasingly necessary. "I'll guide him," Jeanne finally decided, reaching a compromise that satisfied her maternal instincts while acknowledging the reality of their situation. "Elise will draw a detailed map of the tunnels, and I will accompany Marcus to ensure he reaches the extraction point safely." Elise began working immediately, creating an intricate map of the tunnel system, marking areas of potential concern and alternative routes in case of collapsed sections. Her artistic skill transformed what could have been a confusing maze into a clear, navigable path. As she worked, Marcus and Jeanne prepared for the journey ahead. They would depart at dusk, using the cover of darkness to reach the hidden tunnel entrance near the coastal cliffs. From there, Marcus would make his way through the tunnels alone, emerging near his extraction point with enough time to rendezvous with his team before the submarine arrived. The day passed slowly, tension building as the hour of departure approached. Elise completed her map and spent the remaining time teaching Marcus several key phrases in French that might help him if he encountered local residents during his journey. Though she couldn't speak the words herself, she wrote them phonetically in his notebook, alongside their English translations. Late in the afternoon, as Jeanne prepared a final meal before their departure, Marcus sat with Elise at the kitchen table, continuing their improvised language lesson. He had been teaching her more English words, writing them in her notebook and demonstrating their pronunciation. "Freedom," he said, writing the word and watching as she silently formed the shape with her mouth. "Hope, future, friend." Elise absorbed each word with intense concentration, her eyes fixed on his lips as he spoke, committing each sound to memory though she would not reproduce them aloud. "You know," Marcus said gently, "just because you haven't spoken in 4 years doesn't mean you can't. Your voice is still there, waiting for you to be ready to use it again." Elise looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the word "friend" that he had written in her notebook. When she looked up again, her eyes held a question she didn't need to write down. "Will you come back?" her expression asked clearly. "After the war?" Marcus understood her unspoken query. "I'd like to," he said honestly. "When this is all over, I'd like to come back and see you and your mother again. See you speaking, perhaps, if you decide you want to." Elise considered this for a long moment, then wrote carefully in her notebook, "I will wait." Those 3 simple words carried the weight of a promise, one that touched Marcus deeply. In the midst of a world torn apart by conflict, this connection they had formed represented something pure and hopeful, a reminder of why the fight for freedom mattered on the most human level. As dusk approached, they made their final preparations. Jeanne packed a small satchel with food and water for their journey, while Marcus studied Elise's tunnel map one last time, committing its details to memory. Just as they were preparing to depart, the distant sound of heavy artillery fire erupted along the coast, far more intense than the sporadic bombardments of the previous night. All 3 rushed to the window, watching as flashes of light illuminated the horizon. "Something big is happening," Jeanne whispered, her face tense with both fear and hope. Could it be? Marcus knew it couldn't be the main invasion yet. The timing was wrong, and the scale seemed insufficient. But it could be one of many preparatory operations designed to test German defenses and gather intelligence for the coming assault. "Whatever it is," he said resolutely, "it makes our mission even more important. The intelligence we've gathered needs to reach our command as soon as possible." With renewed urgency, they prepared to depart. As Marcus and Jeanne gathered their supplies, Elise stood watching them with solemn eyes, her notebook clutched against her chest. "We'll be back by morning," Jeanne assured her daughter, embracing her tightly. "Stay inside, keep the doors locked, and if anyone comes, hide in the cellar as we practiced." Elise nodded her understanding, then turned to Marcus. For a moment, she simply looked at him as though memorizing his face. Then, with deliberate movements, she tore a page from her notebook and handed it to him. It was a portrait, not of Marcus as he appeared now in borrowed civilian clothes with several days' growth of beard, but of Marcus in his full marine dress uniform, standing tall and proud. Somehow, despite having never seen him this way, she had captured his essence perfectly. The dignity, strength, and quiet determination that defined him. "Thank you," Marcus said, deeply moved by the gift. "I'll keep this with me, to remind me what we're fighting for." As he carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart, Elise did something unexpected. She stepped forward and hugged him, a brief, fierce embrace that conveyed everything she couldn't say aloud. Then she stepped back, her expression solemn once more, and wrote a final message in her notebook. "Come back safe." "I will," Marcus promised. "Both of us will." With those words, he and Jeanne slipped out into the gathering darkness, leaving Elise standing in the doorway, a small, solitary figure silhouetted against the warm light of the farmhouse, a beacon of humanity in a world at war. Marcus successfully reached his extraction point through the tunnels. 6 weeks later, during the D-Day invasion, his unit returned to liberate Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. Amid the celebration, he found Elise and Jeanne's farm. When Elise saw him approaching in his uniform, just as she had drawn him, her eyes widened with disbelief and joy. She ran toward him, notebook clutched against her chest. "Elise," he smiled, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "I promised I'd come back." She stood frozen, struggling with something inside herself. Then, with trembling lips, she formed a word she had practiced silently for weeks. "Friend," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Marcus gasped, tears filling his eyes. "Yes," he nodded. "Friends forever." Her first spoken word in 4 years formed a bond that would last a lifetime. After the war, Marcus returned to help establish a school where Elise would eventually teach art to children affected by conflict. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.